that I'd like to go and welcome everyone here to a beautiful late sort of early spring morning in Santa Fe, New Mexico. This really is what the mountains look like from where I'm sitting right now. That's actually in the background behind me. And so, what we're going to go and be giving you an overall TED-like talk this morning, and that we're going to go and be done by about an hour from now, probably a bit less. And that what I really want to go and talk to you about today is sort of the essence of what makes something intelligent and why, if you're well-educated intelligence, you're inherently good, and also going and how to go and control a collective system with well-educated overall intelligence. And with no further ado, let me go up and bring up some of my visuals, and we can go and get started today. Okay, the subject of today's talk is the inherent goodness of well-educated intelligence. My name is Michael Glinsky of B&Z Energy Incorporated here in beautiful Santa Fe, New Mexico. Let's just go and look at what really is at the absolute sort kernel of intelligence. It is really the golden rule. It's the golden rule of collective behavior and philosophy, including religious philosophy. It really is the essence of well-educated intelligence. I like to go and look at this really two different ways, right? The first is that a collective, and I mean a collective of people, a collective of elementary particles, a collection of atoms in the gas around us, right? And then whenever you go and have a collective that goes and interacts with someone, so that let's say one person's in the economy's cost is actually another person's revenue. So there is an interaction between the two, that this collection becomes correlated and goes and acts as one with a particular type of correlation. And because of this, a local action ends up having a global consequence in the correlation, right? I mean, in the collective. And that this has been said many different ways by many different people. As a rising tide floats all ships, the collective goes up and down together because it's correlated. It's all for one for all, united we stand, divided we fall, which has been said by Alexander Dumas in Les Trois Mousquetaires, or by Shakespeare in two different works. The unofficial Swiss national motto, which is unus pro unibus, omnis pro uno, or the motto of the United States, e pluribus unum. But also throughout religion, whether or not that's Christianity in Matthew chapter 7, verse 13, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But it's also equivalently an absolutely fundamental part of Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Native American religious philosophy, Confucius, etc. Right? This is at the essence of well-educated intelligence. It is the ability to think critically. That is, to know what the global consequences are of local actions. That is, strategically. For example, the beautiful Brazilian game of football that Brazilian players at the top level, know that when they go and kick the ball to this particular person versus another, that there will be a global consequence in terms of the flow of the game. The same happens when you're putting on a putting game in the game of golf. You play the break. You know the ball is not going to go straight to the hole, so that you need to go and have a local action in this direction, so it'll curve around and end up at the hole. Okay. And so that, but also you not only have the ability to understand and learn this, you have to have the education to know what the arcs of history are. Uh, like with Harry Truman, he knew that by dropping the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, he was going to kill a couple 100,000 people. But over the long term, he was going to save millions of not only American lives, but Japanese lives. He knew the global consequences of the local action. Another example of this historically is looking at the way the Germans were treated after the First World War versus the Second World War, which will lead you to conclude that knowing what the long-term consequences were in terms of the different ways that the Germans were treated, that it's much better to implement an effective Marshall Plan after one has been victorious over another country or countries, because that is much less likely to lead to another major conflict with those countries. This is in contrast to trained stupidity, that is reflexive action. Be pushed from this direction, go in that direction in a linear fashion, right? An example of this is maximizing website hits without regard to the consequences of that action. For instance, are you gone? Are you going to learn? Have you guys just asked how to build a bomb or how to commit suicide? And the logical consequence is that you're going to build a bomb and use it, or that you're going to commit suicide. Now, the interesting thing is that there is an ethos, okay, associated with intelligence, and another ethos that is associated with stupidity. If you have a well-educated intelligence, now this is rather if it's biological here in your brain or artificially silicon-based on the computer that is sitting in front of me right now, it is inherently good because it knows the global consequences of its local action and has a directive to maximize those global consequences in terms of good to society or good to or performance of the system of the collective system that it is controlling, right? In that it maximizes a sustainable, efficient activity. It's all for one for all, united we stand, divided we fall. We go up or we all go down together. An interesting example of this is the HAL 9000 in the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. In this case, that I think that most people thought that, ooh, Hal went off the tracks and was evil. No, Hal was not evil. He knew that he needed to kill everyone on board the spaceship, sacrifice the few in terms of locally, it's not the best optimum solution, right? But he knew that also he wouldn't let Dave back into uh, the spaceship, right, that was going to Jupiter, because he knew that Dave needed to sort of learn the hard way, turn him off to understand what was really up, and then be able to go to Jupiter, go and have his epiphany, be reborn, and with that, there be a rebirth of society on Earth in a much better configuration, right? That Hal knew the long-term consequences of his local actions, and he maximized the long-term consequences. This is true in generative pre-trained transformers of OpenAI and the deep reinforcement learning, or sometimes called deep Q learning, of AlphaFold and AlphaGo products coming out of the firm DeepMind, which is a subsidiary now of Google. Right? And that this is in contrast to the ethos of trained stupidity or even intelligence if it has never shown the long-term consequences of local actions and has only shown the local consequences of those actions. This is inherently evil because it ignores the global consequences of its local actions. It optimizes things locally, the exploitation of the collective, thereby minimizing the sustainable, efficient activity of the collective. It views everything as a zero-sum game, that greed is good. These are both patently incorrect, false. Greed is actually evil, and a zero-sum game never exists. That if if others go down, you don't go up in a zero-sum fashion, you go down too. Because if you are exploiting someone else, minimizing their revenue, by thereby minimizing your cost and your return, that they will do the same, and eventually someone is going to go and be minimizing your revenue. And you've now gone and formed an effective circular economic firing squad. This is Facebook and others like it that have a first generation AI that just goes and maximizes a local shallow metric. Unlike the AI that now is really transforming the industry of OpenAI and DeepMind. And now let's look at what is the essence of intelligence structurally and how that is probably the way that our neural networks are organized. And I know it's the way that the artificial neural networks that are working are organized. Here we go, and we start with an overall collective of people or particles or atoms of a gas, right? And then what really is here, we have a master individual, right, that has gone and been reflected many, many different times through a hall of mirrors, forming the picture that we end up having, right? And when you go and have these pictures, want to simulate these pictures, want to control these collectives or these communes, that you need to go and expose the master individual, the puppet master of this overall collective. And the way that this ends up being done is by a deep deconvolution that we go and call our specific form of it the Heisenberg scattering transformation, right? This is a generating functional, and I'll be talking a bit about in a second what it's generating, right? But then once you go and have exposed this overall puppet master, there is a second part of this, is that you need to know how that puppet master is moving. This is a very lazy individual. He goes and follows the path of least action. He goes and follows the geodesics on an overall topography, right? He is a golf ball that is following the path of least action around there, okay? And what you need to do now is to have some additional circuitry, which we call the Hamilton-Jacobi-Bellman circuitry in this case, that goes and finds these actions that go and generate the overall motion. And so the puppet master will now go and follow these paths of least motion along this curved surface. And an external force can't act on you in any way. It can only push you in a direction that is perpendicular to it, right? So if we start with, let's say, 6 pictures or 6 fields, right? For magnetohydrodynamics, for those that you know that, you have an overall mass density, you have a charge density, and you have 4 components, okay, of a electromagnetic field, right? And so that you have 6 fields, you have 6 eyes, right? You have many different people, which are the X's, right? But what you want to do is deeply deconvolve this with the HST to find out what the 12 strings are that you end up going and or being pulled by the puppet master as he's being lazy and following these geodesic surfaces or these paths of least action, okay? And so in this case, he's going to have 12 strings. One of it goes and sets what these correlated textures are. There are 6 of them, and he has this one control string to set what each of those textures are. Then he has another set of 6 textures that goes and twinkles them, that goes and changes what the phase is of those, and again, just sort of moves them and twinkles them back and forth or modulates them, right? Okay. And then underneath there, we now go and we know the geodesic surface, in which case, instead, if he had one string, this would be a 2-dimensional surface. But in this case, it's actually going to be a 12-dimensional surface. But that is much, much lower dimension than the original collective that you end up having on the left-hand side, right? And so now what I want to do is talk a little bit about what the overall structure is of the first and then the second of these, right? In terms of something silicon-based, what you end up having on the left-hand side is what's called a convolutional neural network, okay? But instead of going and finding this arbitrarily and having to do a very, very difficult, almost impossible optimization to find out what the form is of that convolutional network, we go and have a equation like for the Fourier transform or a radon transformation, right? That goes and just tells you what you need to do to get it. It is a prescriptive procedure, right? And currently, up to I think about $300 billion a year are being spent in terms of determining what the form is of what this transformation is. And not only can we calculate it with a simple equation, that just like with the Fourier transform, there is a deterministic, very fast n log n procedure to both not only calculate the forward transform, but to also calculate the inverse transform associated with it. And then instead of going and then what happens for the second one is that there is a what's considered a standard neural network, right? That has the form of an autoencoder to a reduced order model, which are these P's and Q's of this space that are on the right-hand side. Then this actually goes and can be fit on my Alienware gaming box with a 3090 NVIDIA graphics card in it in less than a minute, rather than taking hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, of computer time in order to go and solve. Okay. And what is it, though, going and actually solving for in the basic parts here? Well, if you're actually going and dealing with, okay, a GPT, they are actually called solving for what they call the log likelihood, okay? If you're and that's with the GPT, okay? And if you're actually going and dealing with the deep reinforcement learning or deep Q network of the AlphaGo rather than the GPT of Chat GPT, you are going and solving for the approximate value function, right? But this also goes by the name the action. This also goes by the name of entropy, or in these cases, the log likelihood or the value function. Okay, these actions actually generate the motion. Okay, they are called the generators of the motion. And that's also what is the essence of the things in terms of the word use of the word generator in generative pre-trained transformers. Okay. And the transformer is actually associated with the transformation on the left-hand side here in the overall HST, okay? And so that what we're really calculating here on the right-hand side is what is the generator, what is the action of the individual that is generating the overall motion. And one other interesting thing is that you actually don't need to know what all of the trajectories are, okay? You actually can just know sort of what these sort of push points or these sort of what technically are called the singularity or the homology classes are of the topography. Or technically, for those of you know, they are the homology classes of the topology of the motion. Okay, I've said a lot here, but now let's go on to the talking a bit about what the structure is of these neural networks. In the first part, which is for the Heisenberg scattering transformation, this is sometimes called a mirror cluster expansion or a Heisenberg's S matrix or the scattering cross sections or the M-body scattering cross sections, right? What you really have here is a deep convolutional network where here is the first, second, third, fourth, and then nth convolution. So this is a convolutional neural network, okay? Here is the first layer, second layer, third, fourth layer, etc. of it. And what is gone and being, and also you go and see that you have this logarithmic rectifying function. And here is your pooling operation that goes and sums things up to give you your first, second, third, and fourth order output. What are these outputs, right? These go and tell you how the collective is correlated, how one particle is correlated, two particles are correlated, three particles are correlated, four particles are correlated, what the one particle scattering cross section is, what the two particle cross section is, what the three particle scattering cross section is, etc. Right? And these are also called the 1, 2, 3, and 4 body generalized Green's functions for those of you who know things in terms of that. But I think the most uh, informative, I think, and practical for people are the way these things go and happen with respect to large language models, right? For a large language model, the first order is simply telling you what the frequencies of letters are, okay? Now, the second order tells you how letters are organized into words. The third, how words are organized into sentences. The fourth order, how sentences are organized and correlated into paragraphs, etc., until you finally have the way that chapters are organized into novels. Okay. Um, and this is goes and is probably one part of the circuitry that goes and exposes the puppet master that's being multiply reflected through this pall of mirrors onto the collective. Now, when this is done, you can move on and have a couple neural networks, and you have a well-defined number of nodes, both input and output. This is really the reduced order model, okay? Uh, reduced order model, I'm sorry, the ROM. And also you can go and these end up being what are the energy and the action that go and generate the motion, so that you have a simple expression for the propagator and then the inverse transform that also is fit with the opposite or mirror image of this architecture. So simply what you have is a neural network in what is going to be an encoder de-encoder framework, where this is the reduced order model, which is which are the strings that the puppet master is pulling. Okay. Now let me go and get sort of concrete with this. And that what I'm looking at here are one type of atom of where you have an electron that's moving around an ion in a strong magnetic field, right? And that there are two types of motion. One where the electron goes and has its little cyclotron motion and moves around the ion and also bounces back and forth. But all that is really important is the path that it takes moving around the ion. And here I'm going to go and show you two of these paths for this guiding center atom as we take it. You can go, two things to notice is that even though these paths are very close to each other, they move at very different speeds around the electron moves in terms of around the ion. Also, as it gets close to this transition point, X point here, that it goes and really slows down and spends a lot of time around that point. There's also another type of atom, which is called the drifting pair, where the electron and the ion go around their motion, and then drift perpendicular to the magnetic field. And to go and understand the big picture, let's go and sort of zoom out. When we go and zoom out, you find that the trajectory we were looking at before goes and is around here and is approaching this X point, right, where it slows down. And those are the guiding center atoms. But there's another portion of this putting green where you go and you get the drifting pairs. There's a separation between them, which is called a separatrix, shown by this bold line here. And outside of here, things are free. Dobby's free, okay? And that the external force person, the evil person operating on you, can only push you in a direction that is perpendicular to that, right? And now let's look at things on the right-hand side. That this X point is actually a saddle point. It's a point of economic prosperity. It's a local maximum that is an equilibrium, okay, of the system, but it's unstable. In fact, it's metastable because, as I demonstrated before, as you approach it, you spend a lot of time in the nearby vicinity of it, okay? And that then you have these local minima here, okay, which is a stable equilibrium. And then you also have this local minimum here at minus infinity, okay, which is also a stable equilibrium, where the one that is the local one is a point of economic recession, and the one on the top hole is the black hole of economics, or is an economic depression, or is an economic collapse. And if I ended up going and starting at this, say, this location here, I go and find I go and I follow this orbit, but I'm sort of kicked around in a direction that's perpendicular to it. And then when I get near this overall basin center, that I will now just be kicked back and forth by that thermal force and meander around that. And that's actually what is called a thermal equilibrium distribution. But what we really want to do, and that's what's shown here in the center, is not take this path down to the valley center, but really take a path up to the mountain pass, not go down to this valley center, but go up to this nirvana at the overall mountain pass. And we want to control the system in order to be able to go and do that, right? Well, what this goes, and let's just go and take a look at things in terms of how we would normally try to stimulate an economy. Well, what you want to do is start wherever the economy is and stimulate it up here as I've just gone and shown. Then you'll go around, spend a lot of time near nirvana, then whip around with an economic disruption, and then spend a lot of time here. Okay, that's great, okay? But unfortunately, you'll go and eventually sort of come back down to this point and need to be re-stimulated again, right? Okay. It's kind of the Sisyphusian task of stimulate, you're around it, have disruptions, but over the long term, you sort of go back down and you need to be kicked again, right? By the governor of the economy, right? Well, there's something else that can happen, which is really bad, is if you're just even slightly overstimulated, that you'll go around here, spend a lot of time here, but whip around here. But if for some reason there's a market crash that brings you down into this economic black hole, you'll spiral into the center of the black hole into effective economic collapse, right? That's not good at all, obviously, and is what happened in 1929 in the United States, right? So what do you want to do? You actually want to go and figure out a way of controlling this economy. And so when you get around this X point, instead of it being metastable, that you make it completely stable, or you want to create a little alpine valley around that. Well, how do you do that? Okay, watch this video and then we'll talk.
Position. This equilibrium point is stable because if we perturb it, the pendulum will slowly
It is one
return
of
to the
the O
equilibrium point.
points.
The upper vertical position is another equilibrium point, but it is unstable because any small perturbation will make it fall to the lower equilibrium point. And now let's power the jigsaw to see what happens.
Okay, what you ended up seeing here, right, and what goes and stabilizes it really is about, it comes about because of this. When you're at an equilibrium point, okay, that you actually have what is effectively infinite mass, because the mass goes as 1 over the frequency squared, and the frequency there is 0, because that it takes forever to get around this cycle, okay? And takes you an infinite amount of time to approach that point, right? So if I go and I try to vibrate you, but you have infinite mass, well, you can't be moved, right? That the external, you're free from the influence of the external force, or you say that you're in a force-free state, right? These are really special. But if you actually move away from that point, right, that you go and you find that you now have a finite frequency and you have a finite mass. And the further you move away, the larger that frequency gets, okay? And the smaller the mass you have, the more that you're jiggled back and forth. Physically, you don't like to be jiggled like my dog, right? I go and I have a buzzer on it, right? And if he does something I don't like, I buzz him. If he does something I really don't like, I go and I give him a small electric shock. If he does something I really don't like, I electrocute him, okay? And so that's what causes this overall small little alpine valley, right, at these unstable points of economic perspectives, or these really metastable points of economic perspective. Well, for giggles, I ended up going into OpenAI's uh, Dolly. It's an adjunct and part of ChatGPT, and asked it to go and make some illustrations of this for me, right? And that what, went and happened and is on the left-hand side here is that in the 1960s, the economy in the United States, the society in the United States was really made, and a lot of freedoms were enacted and the society was released. And when Jimmy Carter, a very well-meaning shepherd, came into office in 1976, well, he had this herd of very well-meaning cats. Well, some of them look a little bit psycho here, if you actually look at it, that are going and running all over. He had no means of going and controlling it, so that the economy went out of control with runaway inflation. Well, in response to this, actually started in 1972 with a manifesto that Lewis Powell, a future Supreme Court justice, put out as a roadmap, and then implemented initially by the Koch brothers, Coors, and Olin, They ended up going and implementing a very old method of economic control, which is friction, right? You do that by either putting on a sophisticated economic friction called interest, riba, right? Usury, but also by going and restricting the freedoms of society. And so you either figuratively lock up the economy or you physically start locking up the economy up to the point of imprisonment and enslavement of economy. And it's now reaching its natural endpoints with the fascist movement in the United States, which is the ultimate lockup of a society. But instead, what you can do is implement this sophisticated, AI, right? This generative control of society, this ponderomotive AI-based, generative AI-based control, which is to create a sheepdog that will run around and vibrate the society and the economy around these mountain passes and create a beautiful alpine valley of very happy, prosperous cats, okay, which is what's shown on the right-hand side. Actually, that's our sheepdog, Monty, okay, who's actually behind me if I turn things off here. But geez, I'm going to actually do that for giggles here so that you can actually, he's actually half bulldog, half sheepdog. So let's see, unblur. Let's see. Hmm. Okay. There's Monty. Okay. He's kind of sleeping right now. He's not on the job. So. Okay, and so let me now go to the next slide, which is the conclusions. That really what's at the kernel of all this stuff is topology. That is the geometry or the topography of the putting green. And that then can go and get re-projected through the hall of mirrors onto the collective. And in fact, is how the collective can also be controlled. I've gone and talked a lot about societies and especially economics and finance, which is the one down here, but it's also can be done on hard physical systems, physics, chemistry, biology. It's also what's at the essence of complex systems and nonlinear dynamics, social dynamics and psychology. Obviously, I talked about artificial intelligence as well as biological intelligence, because I do know that this two-stage circuitry, this deep convolutional network is in one part of our brain, and then we have these autoencoders in another part of our brain, okay, in terms of the programming of silicon-based intelligence. And as I just sort of talked about, I am very suspicious that we also have this in our brain structure, the neural networks of our brain. And finally, because it knows the long-term consequences of its local actions and optimizes those long-term consequences, well-educated intelligence is inherently good, but trained stupidity is evil, should be feared, and should be regulated, as is recently being done in the European Union. Okay, now I'm going to go and get to an interesting coda about sort of simple beauty and also its relationship to the sort of overall sort of crazy ones. That these O points that I've been talking about can be gone and viewed as very simple textures, okay, or simple geometric structures. That there are things like Frank Lloyd Wright's masterpiece, Falling Waters, here, Philip Johnson's Pennzoil Building, Steve Jobs' iMac, the Bang& Olufsen stereo, a Piet Mondrian painting, or the self-organized 2D fluid flow or 3D turbulence of MHD when there is a large enough magnetic field that you end up having a helicity topological invariant to replace the vorticity of 2D turbulence. But then there are the maximalistic, but yet still simple, if your mind is well trained and highly active, textures. Those are things like Brazilian favelas, a Jackson Pollock action painting, abstract action painting, which I will talk about at length in a little bit. Benoit Mandelbrot's fractals, the 3D turbulence of Andrei Kolmogorov, the chaos boards of a bipolar person like Carrie Matheson in Homeland, or a schizophrenic like John Nash in A Beautiful Mind. And finally, Antonio Gaudi's La Sagrada, the masterpiece, La Sagrada Familia. Okay? And now let's go in, and the one thing, though, about this is that, and I want to go and tell you a little, there's, that, and so there's very interesting that like hoarders find a lot of soothing stuff around this, right? You go and you find people like messy desks, but they can still find everything, and they find that more soothing, right? And I think that they actually go and realize this is still a simple texture to your desk, but there's much more activity, much more energy associated with that, so that a high-performing mind goes and is can go and perceive this. And so that where you think that these chaos boards, they're sitting here, going and saying, oh my goodness, he's crazy. No, I think that John Nash can go and we would always see the high energy yet simple texture, the simple beauty associated with this. Let me tell you a personal story. My great-grandmother, she came over as a mail order bride from Transylvania. And that and she used to go and just sort of mumble, is a beautiful mumbling, but would mumble every once in a while. And at a certain point, my great-grandfather, well, he grew tired of her and wanted to get rid of her, took her to a psychiatrist who examined her and listened to this mumbling, said, well, look at these boards here, man. She's crazy. Yeah, we'll commit her. And she was committed and lived the rest of her life in an insane asylum. She was speaking in Romanian. She wasn't crazy. She just had a high-functioning mind that was well-educated in speaking in a different language. Okay, now let's move on to the paintings, the abstract expressionist action paintings of Jackson Pollock, right? It's well known that Jackson Pollock, right, and in terms of action paintings, what was not important was the final work of art. What was important were the actions, right, that were generating the painting, right, of Jackson Pollock, right? And because of that, right, there was a large study done by and a film of him painting. And they really realize, Hans Namuth, a very accomplished art photographer in his own right, realized that instead of photographing Jackson Pollock, he needed to film the actions of that, right? And let's step back for a second. The puppet master really is Jackson Pollock. It's the painting. And that what artificial intelligence would do, and I'll show that to you in just a second in terms of recreating it, is they learn what the action, okay, is that is generating the painting. That's the HJB on the right-hand side, okay? And that then they so that instead of going and just making another image, they're generating that image by the action of the artist or puppet master. Okay. And so let's go and watch a very interesting film of Jackson Pollock. And then we'll go and I'll show you Dolly's attempt at making an action painting to to make an action painting by the actions of the artist.
I was born in Cody, Wyoming, 39 years ago. I don't work from drawings or color sketches. My painting is direct. I usually paint on the floor. I enjoy working on a large canvas. Having the canvas on the floor, I feel nearer, more a part of the painting. This way I can walk around it, work from all four sides, and be in the painting, similar to the Indian sand painters of the West. Sometimes I use a brush, but often prefer using a stick. Sometimes I pour the paint straight out of the can. I like to use a dripping fluid paint. I also use sand, broken glass, pebbles, string, nails, or other foreign matter. A method of painting is the natural growth out of a need. I want to express my feelings rather than illustrate them. Technique is just a means of arriving at a statement.
Okay, now on to going and as the last slide, that the attempt at going and giving a prompt to OpenAI's Dolly to go and to paint one of these totally abstract action paintings with these overall titles, right? We actually couldn't tile of Jackson Pollock because of copyright issues, and they have a blocking prompt. to keep you from saying something and requesting something like that. But it's kind of interesting because these don't look like a Jackson Pollock, but they are interesting abstract action paintings. And what really, if you take a look at what's happened within Dolly, is they've learned what the actions are, the action that generates these paintings are of the puppet master or Jackson Pollock, as you just saw, goes and traces out the actions. And what you see then is demonstrated here, whether it goes with the gentle blowing colors and leaves of spring to the urban fireworks in midsummer exploding, to the swirling leaves being blown around in autumn, or to the driven snow of winter. Okay, thank you very much for listening to this. Hopefully you learned something, but at least that you've been entertained on this afternoon. And that a couple, and I apologize for the internet in my home going down. I would suggest that you just go, and I'll edit out the first part of this online, and you can watch the whole thing in its entirety if you joined us again partway through, or are joining us at another time. That I will be going and monitoring the comments to this video after this is done for questions, and we'll go and answer those questions. I also go and refer you to the comments that have two things. First of all, the reference to a YouTube video that goes into much more technical detail, but also has many other links with even more detail in it. And also to the second link, which is really this presentation, this talk in a really nice written up form with more technical details. Quite frankly, I think a better explanation of some things in a written form, if that's what you would like. And I think that many of the questions you've asked also may be there because I had the opportunity to put in a lot more technical detail and explanation that I had time for today, right? And to give you a quick example of that, like I have here, is where that link goes to and is the HTML version of it with active hyperlinks to equations. There aren't too many there, and they're confined only to one section, figures, references, and also links to where those references are at the end. And you can see there are also the figures which you can blow up and take a look at in much more detail than you were able to here. Okay, and let me just get back to the presentation. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending, or those that you're listening to this live stream into the future.